Okay, welcome to our Eid of Shabbat Friday Parashat class, Perashat Tessave. Question of the day is, when does a person realize that he has achieved greatness? One is striving in a certain area of his or her life, a certain aspect of what they're involved in to achieve greatness. At what point in time do they realize that they have indeed reach that plateau that they're aiming for? So it's possible if the answer is in Perashat Tessave. Well, Perashat Tessave, which discusses exclusively, at least the first half of the parasha, the Bigdei Kuhuna, the garments of the Kohen Gadol and the other Kohanim, as intricately described in the parasha, is incredibly unique, because it is the only parasha in the Torah, in the time Moshe Rabbeinu was born, Parashat Shemot, till the end of the Torah Kedosha, Parashat Zot HaBeracha, over 440 parashiot, where the name of Moshe Rabbeinu was not mentioned. Not only is it not mentioned, but to add insult to injury, he's spoken to, he is the recipient of the information, and yet not referred to specifically. Parasha begins ve'ata, and you, as if to say, I refuse to mention your name. We'll talk to you in the second person, but we'll say you. And it's somewhat difficult. There's our Rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu. He is the one that is conveying the information from heaven to earth, and he should be deserving, albeit he's in all the other parashiot, but why should he miss a parasha? Especially because he's the one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is communicating all this information to. So there's no shortage of answers. Probably the most popular or the most well-spoken about answer is that Moshe Rabbeinu in next week's parasha, which is Ki Tisa, after he temporarily ceases the obliteration order from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Am Yisrael because of their iniquity of Het HaEgel, goes back and attempts to achieve full kapara, attempts to elicit the forgiveness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu of Am Yisrael. And he told Hashem, Ve'ata im tisahatatam. Now, if you agree to uphold, meaning to overlook their sin, and if not, mehenina misifrecha asher katafta. God, if you decide not to, fine. I'm not interested in being in your book. Please erase me. Please take me out of the book. Take me out of Torah, because it's all or nothing. It's either me and the nation, or it's nobody. Now, of course, that request, he lost on both ends. It didn't get full kapara, and Hashem kept him in the book. However, Hachamim tell us that the words, the requests of a Hakam, of a Sadiq, of the greatest prophet of all time, have impact. They can't go without having some type of consequences, and therefore, because it came out of Moshe Rabbeinu's mouth, it had to happen. In other words, there had to be some erasure of Moshe Rabbeinu's name, and therefore he's taken out of the parasha. Now that doesn't really explain why he was taken out of Parashat Tessave per se. It explains why he's missing somewhere, and for some reason, the place that he's missing was chosen to be Parashat Tessave. Oh, that's one answer given. Another answer given is earlier on in the story, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu's first conversation with Moshe Rabbeinu at the Seneh, at the burning bush, and he asks him, he charges him with the mission of taking Am Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. And Moshe was hesitant. Basically, he answered no, and again, no, and no, and no. And finally, his last argument wasn't really an argument. He just told Hashem, Shilachna biyad tishlach. Do me a favor, Hashem, just send somebody else. But if you look there at the Targum Unkelus, Shilachna, what does it mean biyad tishlach, in the hands of who you send? He says, Shilachna biyad dekasher l'shalecha. Send, please, the person who is more appropriate, who is more qualified to send. And the Hachamim tell us he was referring to his brother Aharon HaKohen. Send Aharon. And so that another theory in the Midrash there, therefore, is that this parasha, which is really the parasha highlighting Aaron HaKohen, Hashem sent to Aaron without Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak. That's another answer. There are more simple answers given. Rabbi Soloveitchik said that the parasha, in this parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu was informed that he's not going to be the Kohen Gadol. And he's told that you are to summons and you are to anoint Aaron as the Kohen Gadol. So therefore, if he's left out of the appointment of being he's a Kohen, but a Kohen Gadol, well, it's not even a Kohen really, then he should be left out of the entire parasha. It's a more simpler explanation. And of those that are even mentioned that most of the time on the calendar, not this year because we have a leap year and Adar Aleph, but most of the time on the calendar, Zayin Adar, the birth and day of death of Moshe Rabbeinu, is right before Perashat Tessave, and therefore the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, leave him out of the parasha. So these are all valid, interesting, and answers worth engaging and discussing more thoroughly. However, there's something that you can't bypass. It's difficult even to think of it, I believe. And you have to mention the fact that this is our rabbi. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. Think of what went on in this parasha. Again, let's repeat that pasuk. V'ata hakreb elecha et Aharon achicha. He was told that I want you to bring Aharon. I want you to engage him. I want you to be the one, not only who appoints him in the position to which you're not being awarded, but I want you actually to be the person that oversees the entire process. You're going to malbish. You're going to dress Aharon. You're going to be the person that is overseeing the process of the appointment of the position that you will not merit to get. And that really seems somewhat humiliating to Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, you may suggest that if you're going to leave him out of a parasha, at least don't leave him out of this parasha, where it's bad enough that he has to undergo that type of, you can call it, humiliation is somewhat extreme, but to be in a precarious situation of difficulty where he has to step down and step away, you'd want him at least to be mentioned, wouldn't you? And so really, besides all the great answers that Hachamim give, it's really necessary, it behooves us to try to understand more specifically, why is it that Perashat Tessave is the one that Moshe Rabbeinu was left out of as he orchestrates the process of the appointment of Kohen Gadol to his brother. And to answer that question, one must really look at and observe the great paradox of Jewish leadership. And that is that the greater our leaders are, somehow, the more anav, the more humble they are, which is absolutely flies in the face of leadership in the outside world. You can say, especially in today's world, where leadership ends up causing arrogance. Leadership ends up being the source of people on earth changing decisions and manipulating their courses of action simply based on their willingness or the desire to stay in power and to maintain a position. And that leadership is anything but a humble position in the outside world. And yet, we see the greatest of the great in our nation, starting with our father, our founder, Abraham Avinu, who told HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the exchange of the prayer to attempt to save Sodom v'Amorah, Ve'anochi afar va'efel. What am I to speak? Who am I to communicate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I'm nothing but dirt and dust. and ashes. And he felt that way, and he understood that. It is our rabbi in this parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the greatest prophet in the history of mankind, who at the end of his life, or at least in Perashat Behalotecha, toward the end of his life, the parasha testifies to the fact, I'm sorry, I should say this is still towards the beginning of the desert, but the parasha testifies to the fact that Ish Moshe anav me'od kol ha'adam asher penei ha'adamah. There was no man, there was no person more humble, with greater humility than Moshe Rabbeinu. And it was David HaMelech, the most powerful man in the world at the time, in terms of military might, in terms of wealth and wisdom and influence. And it was David HaMelech who expressed in Tehillim, Anechi tola'at v'lo ish, what am I? I'm a bug, I'm a worm, I'm not a man. And it was David HaMelech who expressed in the Mizmor that we read on Mosei Shabbat, Adonai ma'adam v'teda'ehu, ben enosh v'tehashebehu, adam lahebel dama. What is man that you should even consider man? Man is nothingness. Man is vanity. Man is worthless. And yet they were leaders. Yet they were strong-minded. They had convictions. They led their people. They paved the path. They blazed trails. And how is this? How do we understand such a paradox? It's quite incredible that our people, the greatest of our leaders, felt themselves to be anav. And it was Moshe Rabbeinu that was at the forefront of this type of feeling. You see, greatness, striving for greatness, productivity, reaching heights is really a matter of understanding through all your accomplishments what your place is in this world vis-a-vis your creator, vis-a-vis HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The ability for one to reach great heights and yet somehow not feel on top, because he understands who's really on top. Greatness, for great people, the closer that they get to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more accomplished they are, the more they reach heights in this world relative to all other men, the more overwhelmed they are by the shadow of God. They get closer to God and they become overwhelmed because they understand who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. They know that in a vacuum, they may have accomplished something, but in the big picture, in the grand scope of things, when they compare themselves, their meager being of a speck on a planet, which is a speck in the great, bigger idea and picture of the grand universe and God and who God is, that they really, really aren't what people think they are. It's not a matter of lack of confidence. It's not a matter of low self-esteem. It's not a matter of feeling beneath anybody else. It's simply an understanding of who he is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who we are, and our constant presence in front of him at all times, and that anything that we do, therefore, absolutely pales in comparison. There's a great quote from an astronaut on Apollo 16. His name was Thomas Mattingly, and he looked down on Earth from his spaceship, and he said, it's very hard to take yourself seriously when you're looking at the world from outer space and understanding what you really are relative to existence and creation. And so there he was. There was our rabbi. Not only was he not jealous, not only did he not have a farthing of envy to his brother, but he actually felt like, it doesn't matter to me. You know what? Appoint my brother at the highest, holiest position of Kohen Gadol, because both I and he are subject to the very same supreme power. You know what? Not only can you appoint him, I'll tell you how much it doesn't matter to me. Don't even mention me in the book. Take me out of the parasha. I don't belong here. Give all the credit, give all the greatness. Hey, how about it? Put my brother in the spotlight, will you, for once? And Moshe Rabbeinu, he pulled himself out. In the very parasha that someone else was in the spotlight and taking something that could have been his, that's when he pulled out. That's when he said, the greatness is not mine. The greatness is God's. Let me show everyone that it's not about you. It's never about you. It's about what you do for him. And so what's the answer to our question? When do you really realize that you achieve greatness? I don't think it really matters, because if we'd ever really reached that point, we wouldn't even care, because we wouldn't even want our name in the book. Shabbat Shalom.